Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. In the spring of 1815, when the gardens of Mayfair burst forth with blossoms much like the debutantes of the season, there lived a duke so formidable in countenance and fortune that mothers across England plotted his capture with the strategic precision of Wellington at Waterloo. I speak, dear reader, of Zachary Kensington, the 7th Duke of Halstead, whose annual income of £30,000 made him the most eligible bachelor in all of England. One cannot put a price on love. The romantic souls among you might protest. But I assure you, in the hallowed halls of the Tun, they most certainly did with alarming specificity. The Duke, a man of 28 years, possessed the requisite physical attributes that made young ladies reach for their vinaigrettes with alarming frequency. Raven hair that curled rebelliously at his collar, a jawline sharp enough to cut diamond, and eyes the precise shade of a stormy sea. His broad shoulders filled his expertly tailored coats to perfection, and his cravats were always tied with an elegance that made Mr. Brummel himself green with envy. What he lacked, however, was patience for the marriage mart. A circus of painted dolls, he declared to his closest friend, Lord Simon Hartley, as they observed the latest batch of debutantes at Lady Jersey's ball, trained to simper and curtsy and speak of nothing more substantial than ribbons and weather. Yet you must marry, Lord Hartley reminded him, adjusting his quizzing glass to better inspect a blonde beauty performing a flawless quadrille. The succession demands it. The Duke scowled magnificently. Then I shall marry for practicality alone. A substantial dowry to restore the east wing of Halstead Hall, a respectable lineage, and a temperament docile enough not to interfere with my affairs. Had the matrons of the Tun heard this declaration, they would have swooned with delight, for it eliminated the need for their daughters to possess personality, that inconvenient trait that so often complicated marital negotiations. But fate, dear reader, is the most accomplished matchmaker of all, and she had other plans for our cynical Duke. Miles away in the village of Little Thornfield, Marguerite Zale was having a most disagreeable morning. The daughter of the local apothecary, Marguerite possessed qualities entirely unsuitable for a young lady of the Regency era: intelligence, outspokenness, and a complete disregard for social hierarchies. "You cannot be serious, Papa," she exclaimed, nearly upsetting the delicate balance of herbs she had been measuring. "Lady Pembroke wishes me to serve as companion to her daughter? The same Lady Pembroke who called your remedies peasant concoctions last winter." Mr. Zale, a gentle widower who had educated his daughter far beyond what society deemed necessary for a female, smiled indulgently. "Desperate times, my dear. Lady Pembroke's usual companion has taken ill, and her daughter must be presented at court next week. They require someone who speaks French and plays the pianoforte adequately. Which is to say, they require someone to make Miss Pembroke appear accomplished by comparison," Marguerite muttered. "They offer £5, her father said softly, "and residency at Pembroke House in London for the season." The mention of London caught Marguerite's attention. London meant bookshops, lectures at the Royal Society, to which she might convince her father to escort her, and a world beyond the narrow confines of Little Thornfield. With a sigh that contained both resignation and anticipation, she agreed. What Marguerite could not possibly know was that Lady Pembroke's modest townhouse in Bloomsbury sat just 3 streets away from the Duke of Halstead's magnificent Mayfair mansion, and that their paths would soon cross in the most unexpected of circumstances. 2 weeks later, our heroine found herself trudging through Hyde Park at an indecently early hour, Lady Pembroke having insisted that her daughter must take the air before the fashionable hour to develop her complexion. As Miss Pembroke complained incessantly about the moisture affecting her curls, Marguerite had fallen several paces behind, lost in contemplation of a botanical text she had discovered in Lady Pembroke's neglected library. It was this scholarly distraction that placed her directly in the path of the Duke of Halstead's thundering stallion. The Duke, who rode at dawn to avoid the posturing crowds that frequented the park during fashionable hours, saw the young woman too late. With a curse most ungentlemanly, he pulled sharply on the reins, causing his mount to rear dramatically. The horse's hooves missed Marguerite by inches, but in the process of saving herself, she stumbled backward into the ornamental pond. "Madam!" the Duke thundered, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Have you lost your senses completely? Do you make it a habit to wander blindly before charging horses?" Marguerite, now standing knee-deep in murky water, her borrowed dress clinging most immodestly to her figure, looked up with fire in her eyes that matched the rising sun. "And do you, sir, make it a habit to ride as if pursued by the devil himself through a public park?" The Duke was rendered momentarily speechless, a condition he had not experienced since his formidable grandmother had caught him stealing tarts at the age of 6. "Do you know to whom you speak?" he finally managed, drawing himself up to his full, imposing height. "I know only that I address a man too arrogant to offer assistance to a lady he has nearly trampled," Marguerite replied, attempting to wring out her sodden skirts with as much dignity as the situation allowed. Now, dear reader, I must pause to inform you that at this precise moment, the Duke of Halstead should have been outraged. He should have summoned a park attendant to deal with this impertinent creature and continued on his way. But something, perhaps the way the morning light caught the golden strands in her chestnut hair, or the intelligence flashing in her uncommonly expressive eyes, made him extend his hand instead. "Your pardon," he said stiffly. "You are correct. Allow me to assist you." Marguerite regarded his outstretched hand with suspicion before reluctantly accepting it, only to immediately lose her balance on the slippery pond bottom and tumble forward into his arms. For one breathless moment they remained thus, the Duke supporting the full weight of her against his chest, her hands braced against the fine wool of his riding coat, their faces close enough that he could count the freckles dusting the bridge of her nose. "This is most irregular," he murmured, making no move to release her. "Highly," she agreed, stepping back as soon as her legs proved steady. "And now I shall be dismissed without a character. Lady Pembroke will never tolerate a companion who returns looking like a drowned rat and smelling of pond water." "Lady Pembroke?" The Duke frowned. "You are employed by the Pembrokes?" "As of 2 weeks ago, though I doubt the employment shall continue past breakfast." The Duke's frown deepened. He had met the Pembrokes at several society functions and found them to be precisely the sort of family he despised, pretentious, shallow, and perpetually verging on financial ruin despite their desperate attempts to appear otherwise. "What is your name?" he asked. "Marguerite Zale," she replied, attempting to tuck a sodden strand of hair behind her ear, "though I fail to see how that matters now." "Miss Zale," the Duke said with sudden decision, "please inform Lady Pembroke that the Duke of Halstead sends his profound apologies for the accident and will call this afternoon to explain the circumstances personally." Marguerite's eyes widened. "You are the Duke of Halstead?" "I am." "Well," she said after a moment, her lips twitching in a manner that suggested suppressed amusement rather than appropriate awe. "That explains the superior attitude, I suppose." The Duke found himself fighting an unfamiliar urge to smile. "And your own attitude, Miss Zale? How do you explain that?" "Honesty," she replied simply. "A trait I've found sadly lacking in those who possess titles." With that parting shot, she gathered her sodden skirts and squelched her way back to the path, leaving the Duke to stare after her with an expression that would have sent the gossips of the ton into paroxysms of speculation. True to his word, the Duke called at the Pembroke residence that afternoon. Lady Pembroke nearly fainted with delight when his card was presented, and spent a frantic quarter-hour rearranging the drawing-room and pinching color into her daughter's pale cheeks before admitting him. "Your Grace," she gushed, executing a curtsy so deep it threatened her aging joints. "What an unexpected honor." The Duke bowed perfunctorily. Lady Pembroke. Miss Pembroke. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on Marguerite, standing unobtrusively in a corner, clad in a dress far too small for her frame, clearly borrowed after her morning mishap. Miss Zale. Lady Pembroke's eyebrows shot toward her elaborate turban. You are acquainted with my daughter's companion, Your Grace? We had an encounter this morning in Hyde Park, the Duke replied smoothly. My horse nearly unseated Miss Zale into the ornamental pond. I have come to ensure she suffered no ill effects and to offer my apologies. Oh, Lady Pembroke tittered nervously. How very conscientious of Your Grace. But I assure you, Marguerite is quite sturdy. A mere dunking would hardly inconvenience a girl of her background. The slight pause before background spoke volumes, and the Duke noted the flash of indignation in Miss Zale's eyes before she composed her features. Nevertheless, he continued, I feel responsible. Perhaps Miss Zale might benefit from fresh air after her ordeal. I understand Gunter's ices are particularly fine this season. The suggestion that he might escort a mere companion to London's most fashionable confectionery shop struck Lady Pembroke dumb for several seconds before her instinct for advancement reasserted itself. Your Grace is too kind, but I could not possibly spare Marguerite this afternoon. However, my Catherine would be delighted to. I specifically wish to make amends to the lady I inconvenienced. The Duke interrupted with a finality that brooked no argument. Unless, of course, Miss Zale herself objects? All eyes turned to Marguerite, who appeared to be fighting an internal battle between curiosity and caution. I would not wish to neglect my duties, she began carefully. Nonsense! Lady Pembroke exclaimed, her rapid calculations concluding that the Duke's interest in the companion, however mystifying, might somehow benefit her daughter. Catherine and I have calls to make this afternoon. You would only be sitting alone. Do go and enjoy Your Grace's kindness. And so it was that Marguerite Zale found herself seated across from the Duke of Halstead in his elegant carriage, still wearing Miss Pembroke's ill-fitting gown, and wondering if she had taken leave of her senses. You need not have done this, she said as the carriage pulled away. Lady Pembroke had already forgotten the incident in her excitement over your call. Perhaps I wished to continue our conversation without the distraction of pond water, the Duke replied, studying her with unsettling intensity. What could a duke possibly have to discuss with an apothecary's daughter? How an apothecary's daughter came to speak with the accent of a lady, quote Aristotle, while falling into a pond, and look at a duke as if he were a particularly disappointing scientific specimen. A reluctant smile tugged at Marguerite's lips. My father believes in education regardless of gender. And as for my manner, she shrugged slightly, I find artificial deference exhausting. As do I, the Duke admitted, surprising himself with his candor. Which is why society functions have become my personal version of purgatory. Especially during the marriage season? Marguerite guessed shrewdly. The Duke's expression darkened. The marriage mart is nothing but a glorified auction block. Titles for dowries, bloodlines for connections. I have seen more genuine emotion in livestock transactions. Yet you will participate eventually, she observed. Duty to the succession and all that. When I can postpone it no longer, he agreed grimly. But I shall approach it as a business arrangement, which is all marriage among the ton truly is. Marguerite studied him for a moment. How very sad, she said finally, without a trace of mockery. The Duke found himself oddly discomfited by her pity. It is the way of things, he said shortly. Now, shall we discuss pleasanter topics? I believe you mentioned an interest in botany this morning. The conversation that followed as they sampled Gunter's famous strawberry ices was unlike any the Duke had experienced in the hallowed halls of society. Miss Zale spoke passionately about medicinal plants, debated the merits of various scientific theories, and asked penetrating questions about the agricultural improvements he had implemented on his estates. Not once did she inquire about his annual income, drop hints about her domestic accomplishments, or gaze at him with simpering admiration. It was, the Duke realized with some surprise, refreshing. Their unexpected outing did not go unnoticed. By evening, whispers of the Duke of Halstead's mysterious companion had spread through drawing rooms across Mayfair. Speculation ran rampant, with theories ranging from the relatively benign, a distant relation in reduced circumstances, to the scandalously improper, a mistress brazenly displayed in public. When the Duke appeared at Lady Mottram's musicale that evening and proceeded to engage the Pembrokes in conversation with unusual animation, the Tun's collective curiosity reached fever pitch. He inquired specifically after their companion. Lady Worthington hissed behind her fan to the Countess of Bellingham. A girl of no family whatsoever. Her father sells potions in some remote village. Perhaps she brewed him a love philter, the Countess suggested with malicious delight. Nothing else could explain such marked attention from a man who barely acknowledges proper debutantes. The Duke, oblivious to the gossip swirling around him, found himself scanning the crowded room with annoying frequency. He had half expected Lady Pembroke to bring Miss Zale as additional support for her daughter, but there was no sign of the forthright companion. "Miss Zale remained at home this evening?" he inquired during a pause in the music. "Oh yes," Lady Pembroke replied, flustered by his continued interest in her employee. "Such events are not really suitable for, well, persons in her position, you understand." The Duke's expression cooled noticeably. "I had thought she might enjoy the Mozart. She mentioned an appreciation for his work during our conversation." Lady Pembroke blinked rapidly. "Did she indeed? How unusual, though I suppose some natural aptitude for culture can exist even in the lower classes." The Duke found himself gripping his quizzing glass with unnecessary force. "I found Miss Zale's observations to be more informed and articulate than most I have heard in society drawing rooms," he said with dangerous politeness. As the weeks of the London season progressed, the Tun was treated to the unprecedented spectacle of the Duke of Halstead finding reasons to appear wherever the Pembrokes were in attendance, and invariably seeking out the companion rather than the eligible daughter. He sent books to the Pembroke residence addressed to Miss Zale. He arranged to encounter their party during morning rides in the park. He even endured an excruciating poetry reading because he had overheard Lady Pembroke mention they would be in attendance. "I find this new fascination of yours incomprehensible," Lord Hartley declared as they shared a brandy at White's. "The girl has neither fortune nor connections. She cannot dance the waltz without stepping on your toes. I witnessed that disaster at the Middleton ball myself. And while she is not without certain attractions, she lacks the polish one expects in a duchess." The Duke swirled his brandy contemplatively. "Perhaps I am tired of polish," he said after a moment. "Perhaps I find something appealing in authenticity." Lord Hartley stared at his friend in alarm. "Good God, Halstead, you cannot be considering—" "She is completely unsuitable." "For what?" the Duke countered. "Pleasant conversation? Intelligent discourse? Or are you suggesting I have matrimonial intentions?" "The entire Tun is suggesting exactly that," Lord Hartley exclaimed. "Your mother has written from Bath demanding explanations. 3 eligible debutantes have developed mysterious ailments preventing their appearance at events where you might ignore them in favor of an apothecary's daughter. You must see how this appears." The Duke set down his glass with a decisive click. "I see only that society has nothing better to do than speculate about matters that do not concern them." But privately the Duke was troubled. His friend was right. His behavior was causing talk, and that talk would inevitably affect Miss Zale. Already, he had noticed other companions and governesses giving her a wide berth, fearful of being tainted by association with a girl who had somehow attracted improper attention from a duke. Even more concerning were his own feelings. What had begun as mere curiosity had evolved into something dangerously like admiration, and lately, most alarmingly, into a physical awareness that made it difficult to maintain his composure in her presence. The practical marriage he had planned seemed increasingly unappealing when compared to the prospect of a lifetime of conversations with Marguerite Zale. For her part, Marguerite viewed the Duke's attention with a mixture of pleasure and trepidation. She enjoyed their discussions immensely, but she was not naive. She understood that whatever his interest, it could not lead to anything respectable. Dukes did not marry apothecaries' daughters, and Marguerite Zale was not the sort of woman to accept any less honorable arrangement. The situation came to a head at the Hartley Ball, a highlight of the season that the Pembrokes had secured invitations to through the most shameless maneuvering. To Marguerite's surprise, Lady Pembroke had insisted she accompany them, even going so far as to provide a gown of pale blue silk that, while not the height of fashion, was far finer than anything Marguerite had ever worn. "The Duke will expect to see you," Lady Pembroke explained with transparent calculation, "and your presence seems to put him in good humor, which can only benefit Catherine's prospects." Marguerite bit back a retort about being used as a lure for a fish too large for their net, and instead focused on the unexpected pleasure of attending a proper ball. Her enjoyment, however, was short-lived. From the moment they arrived, she was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed her. Ladies turned their shoulders as she passed, gentlemen eyed her with speculative smirks, and more than once she overheard the phrase "Duke's fancy," accompanied by knowing laughter. The Duke himself was engaged in conversation with his host when they entered, but he broke off mid-sentence when he spotted her, his expression shifting from boredom to something warmer that sent an unwelcome flutter through her chest. He made his way to her side with a directness that caused fresh ripples of gossip, bowing over her hand with formal correctness that nonetheless felt intimate. "Miss Zale, you look—" He paused, seeming to search for an appropriate compliment. "Out of place?" she supplied with a wry smile. "I assure you, I am keenly aware. I was going to say refreshing," he corrected. "That shade of blue suits you admirably." Before she could respond, Lady Jersey herself approached, her calculating gaze sweeping over Marguerite with the precision of a military strategist assessing enemy positions. "Your Grace," she purred, "you must introduce me to your friend." The Duke performed the introduction with cool formality, but Marguerite was not deceived. This was an inspection, and the tension in the Duke's jaw suggested he knew it as well. "How charming to meet a companion with such elevated interests," Lady Jersey remarked, her emphasis making clear her skepticism. "One wonders where an apothecary finds the means to provide such an education." "My father believes knowledge should not be the exclusive province of wealth," Marguerite replied evenly. "As for means, medicinal expertise is valued even outside fashionable circles, my lady." Lady Jersey's eyebrows rose at this direct response. "Indeed? How fascinating. And tell me, does your father have ambitions for you beyond companionship? A match with a respectable shopkeeper, perhaps? Or has your time among the ton-inspired loftier aspirations?" The implication was unmistakable, and Marguerite felt heat rise in her cheeks. Before she could formulate a response that wouldn't result in immediate social suicide, the Duke intervened. "Miss Zale's aspirations are her own affair," he said coldly. "As it happens, the orchestra is beginning a country dance. Miss Zale, would you do me the honor?" It was unheard of for a Duke to stand up with a companion for the opening dance, and the shock that rippled through the ballroom was almost palpable. But Marguerite, her pride stung by Lady Jersey's insinuations, placed her hand on his proffered arm with deliberate composure. "I'm afraid you'll find my dancing lacks the polish of my conversation, Your Grace," she murmured as he led her to the floor. Then I shall enjoy its authenticity all the more, he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. The dance brought them together and apart in the prescribed pattern, but each time they joined hands, Marguerite felt a current of awareness that had nothing to do with the formal steps. The Duke danced with precision but without joy, except when a particularly complicated figure made her laugh in self-deprecation at her own missteps. Then, briefly, his stern countenance would relax into something approaching delight. When the music ended, he returned her to Lady Pembroke's side, bowed, and moved away to fulfill his social obligations. But his eyes found her repeatedly throughout the evening, and each glance felt like a tangible connection across the crowded ballroom. It was during one such moment of shared observation, they had both noticed Lady Mottram's new turban, which bore an unfortunate resemblance to a nesting pheasant, that Lord Carstairs approached Marguerite. A baronet of modest means and immodest appetites, Lord Carstairs had a reputation for pursuing women he considered available for dalliance rather than marriage. His sudden interest in Lady Pembroke's companion was entirely due to the Duke's marked attention. "Miss Zale," he drawled, positioning himself so close that she could smell the port on his breath. "You dance with surprising grace for someone unaccustomed to such gatherings." "Thank you, my lord," she replied, attempting to increase the distance between them without appearing rude. "I wonder," he continued, trailing a finger along the edge of her glove in a gesture that would have been perilously improper with a lady of quality, "if you might save me a dance later in the evening, perhaps the waltz? I'm told it's quite stimulating when performed with the right partner." Marguerite withdrew her hand firmly. "I'm afraid I'm not authorized to accept such invitations, my lord. I am here in a professional capacity." Lord Carstairs laughed, a sound entirely devoid of humor. "Come now, we both know your professional capacity has expanded considerably since catching the Duke's eye. One might even say your professional opportunities are boundless now." The insult was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Marguerite felt as though she had been slapped. "You mistake the matter entirely," she said, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "If you'll excuse me." "I don't think I will," he interrupted, blocking her retreat with his body. "Not until you explain what particular skills have so captivated Halstead. The ton is positively burning with curiosity." "Remove yourself from the lady's presence," came a voice of such icy control that several nearby conversations faltered. The Duke of Halstead had materialized beside them, his expression promising retribution of biblical proportions. Lord Carstairs paled but attempted bravado. "Merely getting acquainted with the Lady Halstead. No need to be territorial." "Miss Zale is not territory," the Duke replied, each syllable precisely enunciated as though speaking to a particularly dim child. "She is a lady deserving of respect, which you have failed to demonstrate. I suggest you make yourself scarce before I forget we are in polite company." Lord Carstairs retreated hastily, but the damage was done. Whispers had already begun circulating, and Marguerite found herself the focus of even more curious and condemning stares. "I should not have come," she said quietly, avoiding the Duke's gaze. "My presence here places both of us in an untenable position." "The fault is mine," he admitted, leading her toward a relatively secluded alcove near the terrace doors. "I have been inconsiderate of the consequences my attention might bring upon you." "You have been kind," she corrected. "But kindness from a duke to a woman of my station is inevitably misinterpreted." "And if it is not kindness?" he asked, his voice dropping to a register that sent a shiver through her despite the warmth of the ballroom. "If it is, in fact, the first genuine admiration I have felt in years of navigating the insipid waters of the Tun?" Marguerite looked up then, searching his face for signs of mockery or worse, pity. She found neither, only an intensity that made her breath catch. Even so, she said carefully, admiration must exist within the bounds of what is possible. And this, she gestured vaguely between them, is not. The Duke's jaw tightened. Because of arbitrary social distinctions? Rules created by the very people who spend their lives in malicious gossip and empty posturing. Because I will not be any man's scandal, Marguerite replied with quiet dignity. Nor will I be your rebellion against societal expectations, however stifling you find them. Before he could respond, Lady Pembroke appeared, her expression oscillating between dismay at finding her companion in private conversation with the Duke and fear of offending him by interrupting. Your Grace, she simpered. Catherine has been hoping for the pleasure of your company during the supper dance. The Duke's face settled into the aristocratic mask he wore in society. Another time, perhaps. I find I have a matter requiring my immediate attention. Miss Zale, Lady Pembroke. He bowed with perfect correctness and strode from the ballroom, leaving confusion and speculation in his wake. The following morning, Marguerite was summoned to Lady Pembroke's private sitting room. She entered with trepidation, half expecting to be dismissed after the events of the previous evening. Instead, she found Lady Pembroke in a state of agitated excitement, pacing the room with uncharacteristic energy. Ah, Marguerite, there you are. The most extraordinary thing has occurred. The Duke of Halstead has requested permission to call on us this afternoon, specifically to speak with you. Marguerite felt her stomach drop. Me? Are you certain? His note was most explicit, Lady Pembroke confirmed, brandishing a sheet of heavy cream paper bearing the Duke's seal. Now, what can this mean? He cannot possibly. But then again, stranger things have happened in the ton, though never quite this strange. But if he were to... Oh, the connections alone would be invaluable to Catherine's prospects. Marguerite listened to this disjointed monologue with growing alarm. Lady Pembroke, surely you cannot think the Duke has matrimonial intentions toward me? I scarcely know what to think, Lady Pembroke exclaimed. But he has singled you out consistently, defended you publicly, and now requests a private audience. What else could it signify? Perhaps he wishes to offer me a position, Marguerite suggested desperately, as a governess for a relative or a companion to his mother. Lady Pembroke paused in her pacing, considering this. That would be more reasonable, she admitted, though less advantageous. Still, a connection to the Duke's household would reflect well on us. Yes, that must be it. But when the Duke arrived promptly at 3 o'clock, resplendent in a coat of midnight blue superfine that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame, he showed no interest in discussing household positions. After exchanging the briefest of pleasantries with Lady Pembroke, he requested a private word with Miss Zale. With a chaperone present, of course, he added smoothly when Lady Pembroke's eyebrows threatened to disappear into her hairline. And so Marguerite found herself seated across from the Duke in Lady Pembroke's drawing room, with the lady herself installed at the far end of the room, close enough to observe but too distant to overhear a conversation conducted in low tones. You left abruptly last night, Marguerite began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I needed to think, the Duke replied, studying her with unsettling intensity. About what you said regarding societal expectations, about my own intentions, about what I truly want from life. And what conclusions did you reach? She asked, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in her chest. That I have been a hypocrite, he said bluntly. I have criticized the ton for valuing wealth and connections over character and compatibility, yet my own matrimonial plans were based on precisely those superficial considerations. Many would call that practical rather than hypocritical, Marguerite observed. Marriage in your circle is rarely about affection. And that is precisely the problem, the Duke replied with sudden vehemence. I have watched my peers enter loveless marriages for advantage, only to seek emotional and physical fulfillment elsewhere once heirs are secured. The result is unhappiness, infidelity, and children raised in atmospheres of cold politeness at best, open hostility at worst. He leaned forward, his expression more animated than she had ever seen it. I do not want that life, Miss Zale. I want a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine affection. I want a wife who challenges my intellect rather than merely decorating my drawing room. I want a partner, not a possession. Those are admirable sentiments, Marguerite said carefully, but they do not explain why you wish to speak with me privately. The Duke's gaze never wavered. Don't they? You are the only woman of my acquaintance who has shown not the slightest interest in my title or fortune. The only one who speaks her mind without calculation or artifice. The only one whose company I genuinely enjoy rather than merely tolerate. Marguerite felt her heart accelerate dangerously. Your Grace, you cannot be suggesting. I am suggesting nothing, he interrupted. I am stating plainly and directly that I find myself in love with you, Miss Zale, against all logic, contrary to all my plans, and in defiance of every societal expectation. The declaration hung in the air between them, momentous and impossible. You cannot love me, Marguerite finally whispered. You barely know me. I know enough, he countered. I know your intelligence, your integrity, your compassion. I know that you value knowledge above ornament, substance above appearance. I know that when you laugh, truly laugh, not the polite titter society demands, it transforms your entire countenance. He reached for her hand, and she was too stunned to withdraw it. I know that I think of you constantly, that I arrange my days for the possibility of seeing you, that the prospect of returning to my previous existence, balls and dinners with vapid conversation and calculated flattery, fills me with unutterable dread. Marguerite stared at their joined hands, her mind racing. Even if what you say is true, she said at last, it changes nothing. You are a duke. I am an apothecary's daughter. The gap between us cannot be bridged. Cannot. The duke's expression hardened. Or should not, according to arbitrary rules established by people I neither respect nor admire? The rules exist for a reason, Marguerite insisted. Your position requires a wife who understands the ton, who can manage grand estates and royal connections. I would be lost in your world. You navigate it with more grace than most born to it, he countered. The rest can be learned. What cannot be taught is character, intelligence, and the capacity to see beyond surfaces to what truly matters. He tightened his grip on her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. I am not proposing a fairy tale, Marguerite. There would be difficulties. Society would talk, at least initially. Some doors might close, but many more would open, I assure you. And your family? She asked. Would they accept an apothecary's daughter as the next Duchess of Halstead? A shadow crossed his face. My mother would adjust to the idea eventually. As for the rest, there is only my sister, who cares far more for my happiness than for social dictates. Marguerite withdrew her hand gently but firmly. You ask me to leap from one world to another, leaving behind everything familiar, facing potential rejection and ridicule, based on an attachment that has developed over mere weeks. I ask you to consider the possibility, he corrected, to allow me to court you properly, openly, with honorable intentions. To discover if what I feel, what I believe you feel as well, though you guard your emotions carefully, might grow into something worth defying convention for. From across the room, Lady Pembroke cleared her throat meaningfully, indicating that the private conversation had continued long enough to strain propriety. I must have time to think, Marguerite said quietly. This is overwhelming. The Duke rose, understanding in his eyes. Of course. But know this, Marguerite Zale. I am not a man who changes his mind easily, nor one who fears society's opinion. Whatever you decide, my regard for you remains constant. After he departed, Lady Pembroke descended upon Marguerite with a barrage of questions that she deflected as diplomatically as possible. But that evening, a letter arrived from her father that changed everything. Mr. Zale had fallen seriously ill. The local physician feared pneumonia, and Marguerite's immediate return to Little Thornfield was requested. Lady Pembroke, though initially displeased at losing her companion mid-season, became markedly more accommodating when Marguerite mentioned that she would need to inform the Duke of her departure. "Of course you must go to your father," she declared magnanimously. "Family duty is paramount. I shall arrange for the mail coach tomorrow morning." But when Marguerite sent a brief note to the Duke explaining her sudden departure, the response was swift and unexpected. His own carriage arrived at the Pembroke residence at dawn, with instructions to convey Miss Zale to Little Thornfield with all possible speed and comfort. Lady Pembroke nearly swooned at this mark of favor, but Marguerite's thoughts were entirely focused on her father. She accepted the Duke's generosity with distracted gratitude and departed London with no certainty of when, or if, she would return. The journey to Little Thornfield, which would have taken 2 days by mail coach with numerous uncomfortable stops, was accomplished in a single day thanks to the Duke's well-sprung carriage and frequent changes of horses at the finest posting inns. Marguerite arrived at her childhood home as dusk was falling, her heart in her throat as she noted the physician's gig still outside the modest cottage attached to her father's apothecary shop. The next days passed in a blur of worry and exhaustion. Mr. Zale's condition was indeed serious. The pneumonia had taken hold in both lungs, and his breathing was labored and painful. Marguerite worked alongside the local physician, applying her knowledge of herbal remedies to complement his more conventional treatments. She had no time to think about London, the Duke, or his extraordinary declaration. Her world narrowed to her father's sickroom, the preparation of medicinal teas, and brief intervals of restless sleep snatched in the chair beside his bed. It was during one such moment of exhausted slumber, her head pillowed on her arms at her father's bedside, that a commotion outside the cottage roused her. Voices, one raised in protest, another responding with aristocratic authority, and then footsteps on the cottage stairs. The door opened to reveal the Duke of Halstead, his tall frame filling the modest doorway, his expression a complex mixture of concern and determination. "Your Grace." Marguerite rose unsteadily, acutely aware of her rumpled appearance and the simple country dress she had changed into upon arrival. "What are you doing here?" "You did not reply to my letters," he said simply, entering the room and closing the door behind him. "I became concerned." "Letters?" Marguerite blinked in confusion. "I received no letters." "I sent 3, the Duke replied, his gaze moving to the still figure in the bed. "How is your father?" "Fighting," she said, her voice catching. "The fever broke yesterday, but his breathing remains labored. The doctor says the next 2 days will be critical." The Duke nodded, then did something that shocked Marguerite to her core. He removed his immaculate coat, rolled up the sleeves of his fine linen shirt, and asked, "How can I help?" For the next 48 hours, the Duke of Halstead, a man whose hands had never known labor beyond the management of a horse's reins or the handling of hunting equipment, helped Marguerite tend to her father. He fetched water, built up the fire, prepared simple meals that she was too exhausted to refuse, and even, when she finally succumbed to exhaustion, sat vigil beside Mr. Zale's bed while she slept. When Mr. Zale's breathing finally eased and the physician declared the crisis past, Marguerite found herself in the Duke's arms, weeping with relief against the fine linen of his shirt. "He will recover," the Duke murmured into her hair, his own voice suspiciously rough. He is as resilient as his daughter. It was only after her father had been settled comfortably, sleeping naturally for the first time in days, that Marguerite allowed the Duke to lead her downstairs to the small parlor where a fire burned cheerfully. "You should not have come," she said, though the reproof lacked conviction. "The ton will be buzzing with speculation about your sudden disappearance." "Let them buzz," he replied dismissively. "I left word with Hartley about my destination. No doubt he has informed the relevant gossips that I am attending to a personal matter in the country." "And is that what I am?" Marguerite asked, suddenly finding courage in exhaustion. "A personal matter?" The Duke's expression softened as he gazed at her. Hair escaping its pins, dark shadows beneath her eyes, hands reddened from work. "You," he said with deliberate emphasis, "are the woman I love, the woman I wish to marry. The woman I will move heaven and earth to make my duchess, if she will have me." Marguerite shook her head, not in negation but in wonder. "You have seen me now as I truly am, not the companion attempting to fit into London society, but the country apothecary's daughter with rough hands and practical skills. And still you persist in this madness." "I have seen you at your most authentic," he corrected, "and it has only strengthened my conviction. You are extraordinary, Marguerite Zale. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength of character. These are the qualities I want in the woman who will share my life and help me leave a legacy beyond mere wealth and titles." He reached for her hands, enfolding them in his larger ones without hesitation despite their roughened state. "I know you fear the transition, the scrutiny, the potential for social rejection. But consider this: as my duchess, you would have the power to effect real change. To establish schools for girls regardless of station, to improve medical care for the poor, to challenge the very social boundaries that make you hesitate." It was a vision that spoke directly to Marguerite's deepest values, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly contemplate a future as the Duchess of Halstead. "Your Grace," she began. "Zachary," he interrupted. "If you are considering becoming my wife, you should at least use my given name." "Zachary," she amended, the name feeling strange and intimate on her lips. "What you propose is still unprecedented. A duke marrying so far beneath his station. There would be consequences." "Without doubt," he agreed readily. "Initial social ostracism from certain quarters, whispers behind fans, perhaps even direct insults, though few would dare risk my displeasure so openly. But consider this: society always, eventually, adjusts to what it cannot change. And while they are adjusting, we would be living our lives according to our own principles rather than their expectations." He leaned closer, his eyes intent on hers. "Tell me truthfully, Marguerite, do you feel nothing for me? Is there no part of you that wishes to explore what might exist between us?" Marguerite closed her eyes briefly, gathering her courage. "You know there is," she admitted quietly. "I have tried to dismiss it as flattery, the natural response of a woman of my station to attention from a man of yours. But it is more than that. I admire your mind, your principles, your willingness to question conventions rather than blindly follow them." She opened her eyes to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And yes, I am attracted to you in ways that have nothing to do with your title or position. But that doesn't change the reality of our situations." "Doesn't it?" he challenged. "If we both feel this connection, this potential for something profound and genuine, is it not worth facing whatever obstacles society might place in our path?" From the upper floor came the sound of movement, Mr. Zale awakening from his healing sleep. "I must check on my father," Marguerite said, rising from her chair. "And you should return to London before your absence creates even more speculation." The Duke rose as well, but instead of releasing her hands, he drew her closer. "I will go," he agreed, but not without an answer. Will you at least consider my proposal? Allow me to court you formally, with your father's blessing when he is well enough to give it. Marguerite looked up at him. This man who had defied convention, traveled across counties, and sat vigil at a sick man's bedside simply because he cared for her. Yes, she said softly. I will consider it, but I make no promises beyond that. His smile, the first full, unreserved smile she had ever seen from him, transformed his features from handsome to breathtaking. That is enough, he said. For now. He departed that afternoon, extracting a promise that she would send word of her father's condition daily, and leaving behind a household staff he had apparently hired from the village to assist during Mr. Zale's convalescence. Over the following weeks, as her father gradually regained his strength, Marguerite found herself the recipient of a courtship both determined and considerate. Books arrived, not just poetry or novels deemed suitable for ladies, but medical texts, scientific journals, and botanical studies she had mentioned wanting to read. Letters came daily, thoughtful missives discussing everything from agricultural improvements to philosophical questions, always ending with some personal observation that made it clear he was thinking of her as a woman, not merely an intellectual companion. And most surprisingly, the Duke himself appeared every Friday, having apparently rearranged his schedule to allow for weekly visits to Little Thornfield. He brought news of London, discussed village improvements with surprising knowledge of local conditions, and gradually won over Mr. Zale with his genuine interest in herbal medicine and respect for the apothecary's expertise. He is not what I expected in a duke, her father observed one evening after Zachary had departed. There is substance beneath the privilege. Yes, Marguerite agreed, unable to keep a note of warmth from her voice. There is. Mr. Zale studied his daughter with the insight of a parent who knows their child well. You care for him, he said. It was not a question. I do, she admitted. More than I should, perhaps. More than is wise, certainly. Wisdom and love rarely keep company, her father said with the sad smile of a widower who had adored his wife. But I would not have you deny yourself happiness out of fear, Marguerite. Fear? She repeated, startled. Yes, fear, he affirmed gently. Not of society's opinion, you have never cared overmuch for that, but of stepping into a world so different from your own. Of failing. Of finding yourself inadequate to the role he offers you. Marguerite stared at her father, struck by the accuracy of his assessment. How can I not fear that? She asked. I know nothing of being a duchess. You know how to be Marguerite Zale, he replied simply. A woman of intelligence, compassion, and integrity. The rest is mere decoration, how to address an earl versus a marquis, which fork to use for fish, how to manage a household staff of 50 rather than 2. These things can be learned. He reached for her hand, his grip still weak from his illness but his eyes clear and wise. The question is not whether you can adapt to his world, my dear. It is whether you wish to build a new world together. His words stayed with her long after he had retired for the evening. A new world together. Not his, not hers, but something they might create that drew from both. When the Duke, Zachary, as she now thought of him, arrived for his weekly visit the following Friday, Marguerite met him with new resolve. I would like to walk in the gardens, she said after the initial greetings had been exchanged. The apple trees are in blossom, and the air is particularly fine today. If he was surprised by this departure from their usual pattern of conversation in the parlor, he did not show it. Instead, he offered his arm with a courtly gesture that somehow managed to convey respect rather than irony. They strolled in companionable silence through the modest garden behind the apothecary shop, where medicinal herbs grew in neat beds alongside more common flowers and vegetables. The apple trees at the far end had indeed burst into glorious bloom, their delicate petals occasionally drifting down in the light breeze. I've been thinking, Marguerite said at last. about what you proposed in London, and again here after my father's crisis passed. And, Zachary prompted when she paused, his tone carefully neutral, though she could feel the tension in the arm beneath her hand. And I have questions, she replied. Practical questions that need answering before I can give you the response you seek. Ask them, he said simply. All of them. Would I be expected to sever ties with my father? With this village? With my former life entirely? No, he answered without hesitation. Your father would always be welcome in our home, whether in London or at Halstead Hall. As for this village, I had thought we might establish a proper medical clinic here. Something that builds on your father's work but expands it with additional resources. Marguerite felt a weight lift from her shoulders. And my role as Duchess? What would be expected of me? Traditionally, producing an heir, managing the household, entertaining appropriately, engaging in charitable works deemed suitable for a woman of your station. His lips quirked in a wry smile. But I think we established long ago that I have little interest in tradition for tradition's sake. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I would expect partnership, Marguerite. Your input on estate management, on philanthropic endeavors, on the raising of our children. I would expect honesty even when, especially when, you disagree with me. I would expect you to pursue your own interests and to challenge me to broaden mine. And society? She pressed. How would we navigate the inevitable disapproval? With dignity, patience, and the knowledge that true acceptance comes with time, he replied. There will be those who never accept you, of course. But they are not people whose opinions I value. Those I do, Hartley, my sister, a few others, will judge you on your own merits, not your origins. Marguerite nodded, absorbing this. One final question, she said, gathering her courage. Why me? Truly, Zachary. Of all the women in England, why choose one who brings you complications rather than advantages? For a moment, he seemed taken aback by the directness of her question. Then his expression softened into something so tender it made her heart constrict. Because you see me, he said simply. Not the Duke, not the fortune, not the social position. You see Zachary Kensington with all his faults and virtues. You challenge me to be better than I am. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me feel. He broke off, seeming to search for adequate words. Everything, he finally concluded. You make me feel everything I had convinced myself was unnecessary or impossible. Hope, joy, desire. The prospect of a future filled with genuine connection rather than polite obligation. He took her hands in his gaze never leaving her face. I love you, Marguerite Zale, not despite your background but because of how it has shaped you into exactly the woman I need, even when I was too blind to recognize what I was seeking. Marguerite looked up at him. This man who defied every expectation she had ever held about aristocracy, about privilege, about the limitations of her own future. I love you too, she said, the words simultaneously terrifying and liberating. And yes, I will marry you. The transformation of his expression, from tense hope to radiant joy, was something she knew she would remember until her dying day. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing fervent kisses to her knuckles. You have made me the happiest of men, he declared, his voice rough with emotion. And I swear to you, Marguerite, I will spend the rest of my life ensuring you never regret this decision. Their wedding, held 3 months later in the village church of Little Thornfield, scandalized the ton and delighted the local population in equal measure. The Duke's mother, after an initial period of horrified disbelief, attended with rigid propriety if not enthusiasm. His sister, Lady Eleanor, embraced Marguerite with genuine warmth and whispered, "Thank God he's found someone who makes him smile." Lord Hartley stood as best man. his initial reservations apparently overcome by witnessing his friend's obvious happiness. And Mr. Zale, fully recovered and resplendent in a new coat provided by his soon-to-be son-in-law, gave his daughter away with proud dignity. The ton, as Zachary had predicted, adjusted to the unprecedented match with varying degrees of acceptance. There were snubs, of course, particularly from those whose daughters had set their caps at the Duke. There were whispers behind fans and veiled insults at social gatherings. But there was also curiosity, which gradually gave way to reluctant respect as the new Duchess demonstrated both intelligence and a surprising aptitude for navigating social complexities. Her genuine interest in agricultural improvements and medical care for tenants earned her the loyalty of the Halstead estate workers. Her unpretentious manner and willingness to learn endeared her to the household staff. And most significantly, her obvious devotion to her husband, matched by his equally obvious adoration of her, gradually transformed societal whispers from scandalized shock to romantic fascination. By the time their first child was born a year after their wedding, a healthy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's curious, intelligent eyes, the Duchess of Halstead had established herself as an unconventional but undeniably effective mistress of her domain. "I told you society would adjust," Zachary remarked as they sat together in the nursery, watching their son sleep, "though I admit, your conquest has been more thorough than even I anticipated." "Hardly a conquest," Marguerite demurred, leaning comfortably against her husband's shoulder. "More a gradual infiltration. Aided by the medical clinic you established in the East End," he pointed out. "Even Lady Jersey cannot maintain her disapproval in the face of such practical benevolence, especially after your treatments helped her granddaughter's persistent cough." Marguerite smiled, remembering the formidable society leader's grudging thanks. "I merely applied my father's remedies with more fashionable packaging. And that," Zachary said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "is precisely why I adore you. You understand that sometimes revolution requires a veneer of tradition to succeed." "Is that what we are?" she asked, glancing up at him with amusement. "Revolutionaries disguised as Duke and Duchess?" "We are," he replied with sudden seriousness. "Exactly what I hoped for that day in Hyde Park when a thoroughly soaked, utterly unimpressed young woman looked at me as if my title were an inconvenience rather than an advantage." He drew her closer, his arm warm and secure around her waist. "We are partners, Marguerite, in life, in purpose, in creating a legacy beyond mere wealth and position. And I thank God every day that you had the courage to take that leap of faith." "As do I," she whispered, turning in his embrace to meet his lips with hers. "As do I." And so, dear reader, we leave our Duke and his unexpected Duchess to their well-earned happiness. A testament to the revolutionary power of love to transcend boundaries, defy expectations, and create new worlds where none seemed possible before. Rate this story from 1 to 10, and let us know where you're listening from.